Rule 1 of the ER. If it's wet and not yours, don't touch it. Unfortunately, at 7 a.m., on a Tuesday, after a 12-hour shift that felt more like a tour of duty in a very sticky, very loud war, everything was wet, and all of it was now technically my problem. I was on my hands and knees, wiping a puddle of something I charitably labeled indeterminate biological fluid from the floor of Trauma Bay 2. It was a special kind of puddle, possessing a unique combination of colors not usually found in nature and a smell that could peel paint. I named it Steve. You missed a spot, Chloe. I didn't look up. I knew the voice. It belonged to Brenda, a woman who had been an ER nurse since before hand sanitizer was invented and whose soul had been replaced by pure, undiluted cynicism somewhere around 1998. If you can see it, you can clean it, I grunted, the disinfectant wipe doing little to inspire confidence. Or is your back acting up again, the one that only seems to flare up when there's a code brown or a puddle named Steve? Brenda let out a dry cackle. My back is a delicate instrument, tuned only to the frequency of actual emergencies, not whatever this abstract art piece is. Besides, mister, Henderson in bed 5 is asking for you. He thinks the CIA is trying to communicate with him through his urinary catheter. I sighed, the sound swallowed by the cacophony of beeping monitors, rattling gurneys, and the distant wail of an incoming ambulance. I pushed myself to my feet, my knees cracking a protest. Morse code that spelled out bad life choices. Did you tell him we use the IV drips for that? The catheter is strictly for surveillance by the NSA. It's a common rookie mistake. I tried, but he's convinced you're his handler. Says you have the eyes of a spy. I have the eyes of someone who's been staring at a computer screen for 11 hours and is powered by stale coffee and the sheer spite of refusing to collapse. I corrected, tossing the soiled wipes into the biohazard bin. It's not the same thing. Mr. Henderson, a man of 80-something years with a cloud of white hair and a twinkle in his eye that was either mischievous or a symptom of his UTI, beamed at me as I approached his bed. Agent Nightingale, he whispered, clutching the clear plastic tubing of his Foley catheter. They're broadcasting again. Something about beats. Do you think it's a code word? I leaned in conspiratorially, automatically checking the flow of his drip and the readings on his monitor. It's always a code word, Mr. Henderson, but it's deep-level stuff. Need to know. You just focus on your mission, which is to drink this water and finish your jello. We can't let the beat people win. He nodded sagely. God bless you, Agent. You're a patriot. Just doing my job, I said, patting his hand. My job apparently now included counter-espionage. I made a mental note to add it to my resume, right between proficient in phlebotomy and expert in de-escalating family members who think WebMD makes them a neurosurgeon. I escaped back to the nurses' station, a small island of organized chaos in a sea of medical mayhem. Brenda was there, typing furiously into a chart. Abernathy sent another memo, she said without looking up. Subject line, forward. Thinking synergies to optimize patient-centric care paradigms. I felt a vessel in my temple begin to throb. Did he use a thesaurus for the whole thing again? I swear, that man gets paid by the syllable. Tell him I'll synergize my foot with his paradigm if he doesn't get us a working EKG machine in Bay 3. Already tried. He said our request for new equipment is pending budgetary reallocation following a comprehensive Q4 workflow analysis. So, no, I translated. So, no, she confirmed. He also wanted to remind everyone about the community health and chess fair in the park across the street this afternoon. Says it's a fantastic PR opportunity and encourages staff to engage with the community on their breaks. I stared at her, deadpan. Engage with people. On my break. Does he think we're social butterflies? We're trolls who live under a bridge of sickness and despair. We hiss at the sunlight. Brenda finally looked up, a rare, genuine smile cracking her stoic facade. I know. Scary, right? Go take your 15, Chloe. You look like a ghost that's seen a ghost. She was right. I felt like a frayed wire, one more jolt away from shorting out completely. A 15-minute break. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to escape the symphony of suffering, the relentless fluorescent lights, and the smell of Steve. It was a chance to get a coffee from the place across the street, the one that used actual espresso beans instead of the brown-tinted despair our hospital cafeteria served. It was a simple plan, a good plan. It was, in retrospect, the single worst decision I have ever made in my entire life. The lull before a storm is a cliché for a reason. In the ER, it's a tangible thing. A 10-minute period where no ambulances are screaming their way to your door, No one is actively bleeding on the floor, and all your patients are, for the moment, breathing without assistance. It's a terrifying, beautiful silence, because you know it's the deep breath the universe is taking before it decides to punch you in the face. I was in the midst of one such lull, charting a particularly nasty case of food poisoning, trying to make my lukewarm coffee last. I stared out the big window of the nurses' station that overlooked Checkmate Park. Tents had been set up, a small stage was erected, and little tables with chessboards dotted the lawn. People were milling about. It looked wholesome, peaceful. I hated it immediately. Wholesome things tended to turn unwholesome the second they came through our ambulance bay doors. A twisted ankle from a spirited game of frisbee. A severe allergic reaction to a artisanal gluten-free cupcake. A chess piece lodged in a place a chess piece should never, ever be. We'd seen it all. My contemplation of potential chess-related injuries was interrupted by a presence. A scent of expensive cologne and desperation. A squeak of Italian leather on linoleum. Mr. Abernathy. Ah, Chloe. Just the nurse I was looking for. Leading by example, I see. Diligence personified. He stood there, a man whose spine had been surgically replaced with a jello mold, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. His smile was so wide and so fake it looked like it was about to unhinge. Just trying to keep the paperwork from forming its own sentient civilization, Mr. Abernathy, I said, not looking up from my screen. Excellent, excellent. That's the kind of can-do attitude that elevates our facility from a mere hospital to a beacon of wellness in the community. He clapped his hands together. The sound was soft and fleshy. Speaking of community, I trust you saw my memo about the fair across the street? A wonderful initiative. We've even co-sponsored the main event, a simultaneous exhibition with City Councilman Bob, a man of the people, and a surprisingly deft hand with the Rui Lopez opening, I'm told. I had no idea what a Rui Lopez was, but it sounded like something that would land you a 10-day course of antibiotics. Sounds thrilling. It is. It's all about engagement, visibility, synergy. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The press is there, Chloe? A photo op of one of our hard-working nurses shaking hands with the councilman? That's gold. It says, we're not just healing the community, we're part of the community. My soul withered a little bit. I'm not really a photo op kind of girl, sir. My scrubs have a stain on them that's shaped vaguely like the state of Idaho. He chuckled, a sound like a deflating balloon. Nonsense. It shows you're authentic. Just try to stand with your other side to the camera. Well, carry on. He squeaked away, leaving a vapor trail of corporate nonsense in his wake. Brenda rolled her chair over to my station. You know, for a man obsessed with synergy, he has the charisma of a damp towel. He's the human equivalent of a hold music jingle, I muttered. I'm going for coffee. Real coffee. The kind that hasn't been sitting on a burner since the Bush administration. Don't let the synergy get you, she warned. I'll fight it off with a stick. I grabbed my wallet and headed for the automatic doors. The promise of caffeine, a siren song. The sun was bright, the air was warm, and for a glorious 30 seconds, I felt like a normal person. A normal person walking away from her soul-crushing job to perform the simple, human act of buying an overpriced latte. It was a beautiful lie. My quest for coffee was a success. The latte was hot, strong, and cost a frankly obscene $7. I didn't even care. This was my 15 minutes of peace, my brief parole from the fluorescent prison. I was walking back across the street, savoring the taste of something that wasn't brewed in a vat of sadness when I heard the shouting. It wasn't the usual city noise. It wasn't an ambulance or a car alarm or a domestic dispute. It was the sound of collective, indignant squawking. The sound of a flock of angry pigeons who had just discovered their favorite statue was now covered in anti-bird spikes. My first instinct, honed by years of ER training, was to turn around and walk in the opposite direction. Not my circus, not my monkeys. It's a mantra we live by. If someone isn't actively dying in front of you, it's not your problem until they're wheeled through your doors. But my curiosity, that traitorous little gremlin, got the better of me. I slowed my pace, sipping my latte, and drifted towards the edge of the chess fair. The source of the commotion was a small crowd gathered around one of the central chess tables. They were hemming in a boy standing on a folding chair. He couldn't have been more than 12, with a mop of unruly black hair and glasses that were slightly too big for his face. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He looked bored. Utterly, profoundly bored. as if he were being forced to listen to a lecture on the history of beige paint. Surrounding him was a circle of adults, mostly middle-aged, all wearing identical, offensively bright green t-shirts that read, "Make the smart move, vote for Councilman Bob." They weren't violent, not really. They were just vibrating with a specific kind of suburban rage. It was the anger of a homeowners association that has just discovered someone painted their mailbox a non-approved shade of taupe. I got closer, using a large oak tree for cover, and tried to piece together what was happening. At the center of it all was Councilman Bob himself, a portly man with a comb-over that was fighting a losing battle against a gentle breeze. He looked like a wilting head of lettuce. Next to him, a man with a clipboard and a Bluetooth earpiece, who I instantly clocked as the campaign manager was doing most of the shouting. "It's a disgrace!" the campaign manager yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "An absolute lack of respect for a public official." "I was merely providing an accurate post-game analysis," the boy on the chair said, his voice clear and unnervingly calm. An older woman in a "vote for Bob" shirt shook her head, her fist clenched. "You humiliated him, in front of everyone, and his children are here?" I scanned the crowd. What could this kid have possibly done? Did he flip the chessboard? Accuse the councilman of cheating? Pull his pants down? Then, a man next to me, talking animatedly into his phone, provided the answer. "Yeah, it was insane, Phil. The kid beat him in 4 moves. 4. They call it a scholar's mate." Then, when the reporter from the local paper asked the kid for his thoughts, he just destroyed him. The man held his phone away for a second to better articulate his point to the universe. He said, and I quote, "Councilman Bob's opening was illogical, his mid-game chaotic, and his queenside castling maneuver was as ill-conceived as his proposed fiscal policy, which demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of basic economics. It was an expected outcome." Oh, kid. I took a long, slow sip of my latte. It was at this exact moment that the situation tipped from mildly amusing local drama to impending ER visit. The campaign manager, fueled by righteous indignation and probably a few too many complimentary juice boxes, stepped forward. His face was inches from the kid's. "You think you're so smart, huh? You little punk," he spat. "This is a community event. It's about sportsmanship. Chess is not a sport. It is a cerebral art form. And sportsmanship does not require one to praise a demonstrably flawed strategy," the boy replied, adjusting his glasses. His name, I would later learn, was Leo. The campaign manager's brain seemed to short-circuit. He couldn't process the calm, clinical destruction of his entire worldview by a 12-year-old. So he did what any cornered, intellectually insecure adult would do. He got physical. He didn't punch the kid. He didn't push him. He shoved the folding chair Leo was standing on. It was a petty, jerky move, but it was enough. Leo wobbled, his arms flailing for a second as he fought for balance. He didn't fall, but he could have. He could have hit his head on the edge of the table, and suddenly my 15-minute break would have become a 6-hour nightmare of concussion protocols, frantic parents, and enough paperwork to deforest a small country. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't a noble desire to protect the innocent. It was pure, unadulterated, professional annoyance. It was the rage of an overtired nurse who could see a mountain of preventable work looming on the horizon. My feet were moving before I made a conscious decision. I stalked out from behind my oak tree, my latte held in front of me like a holy scepter. "Hey!" My voice cut through the squawking. It was my ER voice, the one I use for patients who were trying to pull out their own IVs or for family members demanding to speak to a doctor right now. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. It had the authority of someone who had seen the inside of a human body and was not impressed. The crowd parted slightly, turning to look at me. I ignored them and fixed my gaze on the campaign manager. "Leave him alone," I said. The manager puffed out his chest. "This is none of your business, miss. This little genius needs to learn some respect." I took another step forward, planting myself between him and Leo's chair. "He's 12. What are you going to do next? Challenge him to a spelling bee and then get mad when he uses multisyllabic words? Back off." Leo peered around my shoulder. "For the record, my spelling is also statistically above average for my age cohort." "Embling, kid, you are not helping," I muttered without turning around. I looked back at the manager, whose face was now a fascinating shade of purple. "Now, you have 2 options. You can walk away and go rethink your life choices, or you can stay here, and I will use this $7 lukewarm latte to create a thermal injury so specific and so awkward that you'll be the subject of a case study in a medical journal. Your choice. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just stated it, like I was explaining a dosage. The manager blinked. He looked at the coffee cup, then at my face. He must have seen something in my eyes, the cold, dead abyss of 1,000 ruined nights, that convinced him I was not bluffing. He took a half step back, just as the wail of a different kind of siren grew louder. The cops had arrived. Of course they had. Because my day just wasn't complicated enough. The two officers who responded were a perfect cliché. There was Officer Dave, a man who looked like he'd been born tired, with a mustache that had seen more action than most rookie cops. And then there was Officer Ramirez, young, eager, with a jawline so sharp you could cut glass on it, and a notebook that was already flipped open to a fresh page. Dave's eyes landed on me, and a look of profound resignation washed over his face. Chloe, for the love of God, I'm 2 hours from the end of my shift. Please tell me you didn't assault a city official with a caffeinated beverage. It was a preventative measure, Dave. The paperwork would have been a nightmare, I said, taking a triumphant sip of my now weaponized latte. This is Leo. He committed the crime of being smarter than a grown man in a cheap suit. Ramirez, bless his earnest heart, stepped forward. Ma'am, I need to get an official statement. Can you describe the incident from the beginning? I gave him my most professional, deadpan nurse face. At approximately 14:30 hours, I observed a crowd of agitated individuals, hereafter referred to as the hostiles, exhibiting signs of verbal aggression toward a minor, hereafter referred to as the asset. The primary aggressor, a male, approximately 45 years of age, engaged in an act of physical instability targeting the asset's elevated platform. I intervened to mitigate the immediate physical risk and de-escalate the situation. The asset remains unharmed. Vital signs appear stable from my vantage point. Ramirez stared at me, his pen hovering over his notepad. The asset? He's a prodigy. It felt appropriate, I said. Dave sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. She does this. Just write down lady stopped a guy from shoving a kid and let's all go home. The campaign manager was trying to give his own dramatic version of events to another officer, pointing at Leo and then at me, but the fire had gone out of the mob. Councilman Bob had already been whisked away, probably to a safe room with a juice box and a picture book. The crowd of green-shirted supporters was starting to disperse, muttering to themselves. Leo, meanwhile, had gotten off the chair and was now standing beside me, looking up. Your defensive posture was tactically sound, he said, as if commenting on a chess move. You created a physical barrier while using verbal intimidation to disrupt the opponent's emotional equilibrium. A classic Queen's Gambit. Right, Queen's Gambit. Sure, I said, finishing my latte. Look, kid, just try not to psychoanalyze the local politicians in public, okay? It tends to make them twitchy. But their policies are demonstrably inefficient, he insisted. It is a logical imperative to point that out. Logic doesn't pay the bills, kid, and it doesn't stop a grown man from throwing a tantrum. Just be careful. His parents finally arrived, a pair of flustered-looking people who seemed like they'd be more comfortable in a library than in the middle of a public park. They thanked me profusely, shook my hand, and hustled Leo away, who gave me a small, solemn nod before he left. I gave the rest of my statement to Ramirez, which mostly consisted of me saying, he shoved the chair, I told him to stop, over and over again until he gave up. Dave just shook his head and clapped me on the shoulder. Try to stay out of trouble, Chloe. At least until my shift is over. No promises, I called after him. I walked back to the hospital, the adrenaline finally wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. My 15-minute break had turned into a 45-minute international incident. I just wanted to crawl back to the nurse's station, finish my charting, and count the minutes until I could go home and fall into a coma. I pushed through the automatic doors, the familiar smell of antiseptic washing over me. It felt like coming home, which was a deeply depressing thought. Brenda was waiting for me at the station, her phone held out. There was a weird look on her face, a mix of amusement and horror. You might want to see this, she said. She showed me the screen. It was the local news website. And there, at the top of the page, was a blurry, zoomed-in photo taken by a bystander. It was me, in my Idaho-stained scrubs, standing in front of Leo, my face set in a scowl, my coffee cup held forward like a shield. The headline read, Hero Nurse Shields Child Genius from Political Rage Mob. I stared at it, at the words, Hero Nurse, at the photo that made me look 10 times more courageous and 10 times more unhinged than I actually was. Oh, I said, the word coming out as a strangled whisper. You have got to be kidding me. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. A single text, then another, then a whole swarm. It was like I'd disturbed a nest of digital hornets. I pulled it out. The screen was a waterfall of notifications. Texts from my mom, my sister, my cousin Greg, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. A dozen notifications from Facebook, where people I went to high school with were tagging me in the news article. Mom, Catherine Miller, are you okay? I saw the news. A mob? Call me immediately. Brenda, from 2 feet away. Looking good, hero. Greg, dude, is that you? LOL crazy? The article was being shared everywhere. And with the shares came the comments. That nurse is a badass. Someone give her a raise? This is what a real hero looks like. A meme had already started. It was my blurry picture with different captions. One had me labeled the Knight, and Leo labeled the King, with the angry mob as the Pawns. Another one just said, "Do not talk to me or my genius son ever again." It had 1,000 likes. I felt a cold dread wash over me. This was the opposite of what I wanted. My entire life was built around a principle of flying under the radar. I was a background character. I was the person who quietly did her job, collected her paycheck, and went home to watch terrible reality television. I was not number Nurse Knight. I was not number Checkmate Chloe. The buzzing in my pocket was replaced by the buzzing of the intercom. Chloe Miller, please report to Mr. Abernathy's office. Chloe Miller, to Mr. Abernathy's office. Brenda gave me a look of profound pity. You're either getting fired or getting a medal. With Abernathy, it's a 50/50 shot. My money's on fired, I muttered, shoving my phone back in my pocket. It's more synergistic with my luck. Mr. Abernathy's office was on the top floor, a hushed, carpeted world away from the chaos of the ER. It smelled like leather and fear. He was pacing behind his giant mahogany desk when I walked in, his hands wringing each other like they were locked in a fight to the death. He was sweating. Chloe, come in, come in. Close the door, he said, his voice a tight squeak. I closed the door. He stopped pacing and pointed a trembling finger at me. Do you have any idea what you've done? Prevented a 12-year-old from a potential head injury and the hospital from a potential lawsuit? I guessed. You've created a media firestorm, he hissed. We have reporters calling. Reporters. From the city paper, not just the local one. They're asking for a comment about our hero nurse, who got into a public altercation with a city councilman's staff. He started pacing again. Our relationship with the council is a delicate ecosystem, Chloe. A delicate ecosystem. You took a sledgehammer to it. He shoved a kid. The optics, Chloe, the optics. We're a healthcare facility, not a political debate club. We are supposed to be neutral, a beacon of wellness in the community, I know. I finished for him. Look, I didn't ask for this. I was on my break. He stopped and stared at me, his brain visibly shifting gears. The panic in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a glimmer of something else. A greasy, opportunistic glimmer. A break, he said slowly. Yes, on your break. A selfless act. Protecting a child. Even when off the clock, our nurses are pillars of the community. He was talking to himself now, spinning the PR narrative in real time. It's not an altercation, it's an intervention. A community health intervention. He beamed at me, the fake smile snapping back into place. This is good. No, this is great. We can work with this. I'll draft a statement. Something about how our staff's commitment to wellness extends beyond our walls. I was saved from having to respond by my phone buzzing again. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I'd been getting them all afternoon. I ignored it. Now, I need you to lay low, Abernathy continued. Don't talk to any reporters. All communications go through my office. We will manage the narrative. This is a teachable moment about synergy and community outreach. The phone buzzed again. This time, a text followed the missed call. Unknown. This is Amelia Vance, Leo's mother. I know you must be terribly busy, but could you please give us a call when you have a moment? Leo has been insistent. I sighed. Against my better judgment, I excused myself from Abernathy's office as he began storyboarding a hospital commercial starring me, and I dialed the number. Hello? A soft, timid voice answered. Hi, this is Chloe Miller, the nurse from the park. Oh, thank you so much for calling, the voice gushed. It was Leo's mom. We just wanted to thank you again. We were so frightened when we heard. Leo is fine, of course. He's been analyzing the event from a game theory perspective all evening. He says your move was suboptimal but effective. Glad I could be of suboptimal service, I said dryly. Well, he was very impressed. He said he's never seen such a decisive, if unorthodox, defensive maneuver in a real-world scenario. He hasn't stopped talking about your tactically sound defensive posture. I could hear a muffled voice in the background. It was Leo. Ask her about her risk-reward calculation? Mrs. Vance laughed nervously. As you can hear, he's very analytical. Anyway, we just wanted to express our gratitude. You were wonderfully brave. I was wonderfully annoyed and caffeinated. There's a difference. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before hanging up. They were sweet people, the kind of people who probably thought a Code Blue was a new flavor of sports drink. It was a strange, alien world. By the next morning, the story had mutated. I was no longer just a local hero. I was a national news blip. My picture was on one of those morning shows, sandwiched between a segment on a surfing dog and a new diet craze. The hospital was buzzing. Every nurse, doctor, and janitor I passed gave me a thumbs up or a knowing smirk. My coworkers had printed out my meme face and taped it to the coffee machine. Patients were recognizing me. Hey, you're the chest nurse, one guy in for a broken arm exclaimed. Mr. Henderson was now fully convinced I was a high-level operative who had just thwarted an international incident. The beat? People won't know what hit them, Agent Nightingale, he'd whispered when I did my morning rounds. It was a nightmare. A low-stakes, vaguely flattering nightmare. The kind of fame nobody wants, where you're known for one weird thing for about 3 days before the internet moves on. I was just trying to keep my head down and wait for the world to forget I existed. Then Abernathy's voice crackled over the intercom again. Chloe Miller. My office. Immediately. Brenda raised an eyebrow. Round 2. Think he's got the commercial script ready for you? God, I hope not. I can't feign enthusiasm for that long. My face will cramp. I walked back up to the top floor, expecting another lecture on optics or a pre-written statement for me to approve. But the man I found in the office was not the man from yesterday. Abernathy wasn't panicked, and he wasn't spinning. He was pale, ghostly white, and he was trembling, but this time with a strange, manic excitement. He was holding his desk phone receiver like it was a holy relic. Chloe? He breathed, his eyes wide. Sit down. Saturday. This was new. Abernathy had never asked me to sit before. He carefully placed the receiver back in its cradle. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing a few times like a fish. That was a phone call, he finally managed. I figured, I said. That was a phone call from a man named Dimitri. I don't know his last name. He had a very thick accent. He's the manager for someone. He was drawing this out with a theatricality that was making my skin crawl. Okay, the suspense is killing me. Slowly, get to it. Abernathy took a deep breath. The story, Chloe. Your story. It's gone further than we thought. It's international. It reached the upper echelons of a very specific, very intense world. I just stared at him, completely lost. It reached the world of professional chess, he whispered, as if he were revealing a state secret. It reached Viktor Volkov. The name didn't mean anything to me. I must have looked blank, because Abernathy's face fell. Viktor Volkov? The Viking? The reigning world chess champion? The prodigy who became a grandmaster at 15? The man who plays chess with the passion of a rock star and the ruthlessness of a Bond villain? You don't know who that is? I'm an ER nurse, not a chess nerd. My hobbies include sleeping and complaining about my job. Abernathy looked like I'd just confessed to not knowing who the president was. Well, he knows who you are now. Dmitri, his manager, said that Mr. Volkov saw the article. He saw your picture. He was, and I quote, profoundly moved by your display of primal, protective courage in the face of pedestrian hostility. This was getting more surreal by the second. Okay? Abernathy leaned forward, his hands flat on his desk. He looked me dead in the eye. His people called. Viktor Volkov is flying in. On his private jet, he lands tonight. Oh. He paused for effect. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. And, Abernathy said, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and glee, he wants to play a private chess match. Tomorrow. Here. In the hospital. He took another shaky breath. He wants to play against you, in your honor. I stared at him. I waited for the punchline. For him to crack up and say it was all a big joke, a prank concocted by Brenda. But he just kept staring at me with those wide, terrified, ecstatic eyes. There was only one possible response. I started to laugh. A small chuckle at first, then a full-blown hysterical can't-breathe cackle. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. because my life had officially crossed the line from merely stressful and absurd into the realm of avant-garde improvisational theater, and I, apparently, was the star. The next day, the hospital was a zoo. And I don't mean the usual ER on a full moon kind of zoo. I mean a literal, honest-to-God media zoo. There were 2 news vans in the parking lot, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky like metallic flowers seeking the Sunday. A handful of reporters were loitering by the main entrance, accosting anyone in scrubs with a microphone. The hospital's PR department, which consisted of one very stressed-out woman named Janice, was running around putting up signs that said, "Quiet please, healing in progress," which everyone was universally ignoring. Abernathy, high on his own supply of self-importance, had decided to stage a dignified welcome in the main lobby. This consisted of a folding table with a pitcher of lukewarm water, a plate of stale-looking cookies, and a banner that had clearly been repurposed from a past event. Someone had taped a piece of paper with "Welcome Viktor Volkov" over the original "Congratulations on your retirement, ladies." I was ordered to be there, in clean scrubs. Abernathy had even offered me a hospital-branded fleece vest for the occasion, which I politely declined on the grounds that it would violate my personal dignity. Brenda stood beside me, munching on one of the stale cookies. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered, spraying crumbs. "I've worked here for 20 years. I've delivered a baby in the parking lot and once reattached a man's thumb with nothing but a suture kit and a prayer. I never got a welcome banner." "You didn't protect a chess prodigy with a latte," I pointed out. "You need to up your game." A Blacktown car finally pulled up to the curb. The media surged forward like a wave. The doors opened, and out stepped a man who did not look like any chess player I could have ever imagined. Viktor the Viking Volkov was not some stooped, bespectacled academic. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with a mane of dark, unruly hair and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking black coat over a simple t-shirt, and he moved with the languid, confident grace of a panther. He was flanked by 2 other men. One, a compact, severe-looking man in a suit who had to be Dmitri the manager, and the other, a giant of a man who looked like he could bench press the entire town car, the bodyguard, presumably. Viktor ignored the shouting reporters, his eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on me. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He strode through the automatic doors, his entourage trailing behind him, and walked directly toward me, leaving Abernathy standing there with his hand outstretched for a handshake that would never come. He stopped a foot in front of me. He smelled faintly of sandalwood and victory. "You?" he said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone with an accent I couldn't quite place, vaguely Eastern European, but polished and smooth. "You are the one, the Valkyrie of the emergency room." I blinked. "I've been called a lot of things. That's a new one." He took my hand. His grip was firm and warm. He didn't shake it. He just held it, his thumb gently tracing a circle on my knuckles. Abernathy looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. "I saw the photograph," Viktor continued, his blue eyes boring into mine. "The fire in your eyes, the unwavering stance. You faced down the horde with the courage of a Sicilian defense." "I was mostly just trying to finish my coffee before it got cold," I said honestly. "And just so you know, this is a level 2 trauma center, not Valhalla. Welcome. Try not to touch anything. It's all probably contaminated with something." To my surprise, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine sound that echoed in the cavernous lobby. "I like her," he announced to his manager. "She has no reverence. It is refreshing." Dmitri, the manager, gave me a look that could curdle milk. The bodyguard remained impassive, his eyes scanning the room for threats. The biggest threat in this lobby was probably the salmonella on the cookie plate. Abernathy finally managed to find his voice. "Mr. Volkov, on behalf of the entire hospital, it is a profound honor to welcome you." Viktor finally released my hand and turned to Abernathy, his smile dimming slightly. "Yes, the administrator. You have provided a space for our exhibition. This is good." He then turned back to me. "I have come to honor your bravery. We will play a game, a tribute to the strategic mind I see in you." I held up my hands. "Whoa, hang on. I appreciate the gesture, I guess, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't play chess. My entire knowledge of the game comes from a Harry Potter movie, and I'm pretty sure that was mostly CGI." "Nonsense," Viktor declared, waving a dismissive hand. "Chess is not about knowledge. It is about instinct, about seeing the patterns in the chaos. I have seen you in your arena." He gestured vaguely toward the ER entrance. That is chaos, and you are its queen. The game will be a formality. Before I could protest further, Abernathy jumped in. Chloe, you'll have the rest of the day off, of course. Paid. To prepare for the match. And just when I thought I had an escape route, a small voice cut through the commotion. I will be her second, Leo. He was standing just behind Victor, his parents hovering nervously in the background. He must have come with them. He looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. I will advise you on the openings. We can prepare a solid defense. I was trapped, cornered by a hospital administrator desperate for PR, a dramatic world champion with a hero complex, and a 12-year-old genius who wanted to be my coach. There was no way out. Fine, I sighed. Fine. But if I get a headache, I'm forfeiting. Victor's grin returned. Excellent. Let the training begin. My training took place in Conference Room B, a soul-crushingly beige room that was usually used for mandatory CPR recertification classes. The battlefield was a cheap folding table, upon which sat a simple, plastic chess set Leo's parents had brought from home. My coach, Leo, sat opposite me. Okay, he began, setting up the pieces with deft precision. Given your natural disposition toward aggressive defense, as demonstrated in the park, I would suggest we avoid the complex theoretical lines of the King's Indian defense. Instead, we should focus on the Karo-Kan. It is solid, reliable, and often frustrates attacking players. I stared at the little plastic figures. Right, Karo-Kan. Got it. So, which one is the little horse piece again? And what does he do? Leo stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked utterly bewildered. The knight? He stammered. It moves in an L shape. It's the only piece that can jump over other pieces. It is fundamental. Okay, L shape. Cool. I pointed to the pointy one. And this guy? The bishop? He just goes diagonally? That seems kind of limited, doesn't it? Like, he can only ever be on one color of square his whole life. It's tragic when you think about it. Leo put his head in his hands. We are doomed. Our disastrous training session was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Victor. He'd shed the dramatic black coat and was now just in a t-shirt that fit him in a way that was frankly distracting. He leaned against the doorframe, a picture of casual confidence. I have come to scout my opponent, he announced, to gauge her spirit, her will to win. He looked at the plastic chess set, then at my face, then at Leo's despairing posture. The spirit appears to be low. She thinks the bishop's life is tragic, Leo mumbled into his hands. Victor chuckled, pushing off the doorframe and pulling up a chair next to me. He completely ignored Leo and the chessboard. Forget the pieces. They are just wood and plastic. Tell me about your chaos. Tell me about your work. Your manager says you are the best nurse he has. Abernathy thinks the best nurse is the one who doesn't file for overtime, I said. But sure, what do you want to know? Tell me your craziest story, he said, his blue eyes sparkling with genuine curiosity. The moment of most supreme chaos. So I did. I told him about the time we had a multiple car pileup on the freeway. At the same time, a woman went into labor in the waiting room, and a guy came in with a live raccoon stuck to his face. I told him about the delicate dance of prioritizing patients, of delegating tasks, of keeping my own panic locked down so I could think clearly. I told him about the time I had to calm down a patient who was high on bath salts and convinced he was a sentient orange. He listened, completely captivated. He wasn't looking at me like I was a hero or some damsel. He was looking at me like an equal, like a fellow strategist who just happened to fight on a different board. You see, he said when I finished, you take a situation with 100 variables, all of them critical, and you instantly identify the threat. You sacrifice a pawn, the guy with the minor laceration, to save the queen, the patient with the arterial bleed. You anticipate the opponent's moves, the family that is about to panic, and you counter them with a calm word. You do not play chess, Chloe. You are chess. I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling. I think it was respect. Okay, Dr. Phil, I said, trying to deflect with sarcasm. That's a nice speech, but you're still going to wipe the floor with me. The result of the game is irrelevant, he said, his voice dropping a little. He was leaning closer now. The playing is the tribute. His eyes flicked down to my lips for a fraction of a second, and then back up. Although, I must admit, I am now very intrigued to see what kind of move a woman who once negotiated with a sentient orange will make. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Brenda. Is the hot chess Viking flirting with you? We have a visual from the hallway. Abernathy looks like he's going to lay an egg. I looked past Victor, through the little window in the conference room door. Brenda and two other nurses were crowded around it, giving me unsubtle thumbs-ups. This day just kept getting weirder. The stage was set. The match of the century, as Brenda had dramatically dubbed it, was about to begin in the soul-crushing beige abyss of Conference Room B. The audience consisted of a hyperventilating Mr. Abernathy, a deadly serious Leo, Brenda, who had snuck in with a bag of popcorn, and Victor's two-man entourage of Dimitri and the Human Mountain. Victor had insisted on using his own chessboard, which his bodyguard produced from a velvet-lined case. It was a thing of beauty hand-carved wood, weighted pieces that felt heavy and important. It looked wildly out of place on the scuffed-up folding table. Victor sat opposite me, the picture of composure in a tailored dark shirt. I sat there in my clean, but still very much nursey, scrubs. The contrast was ridiculous. It felt like a penguin was about to face off against a shark in a battle of wits. "You have the white pieces, of course," Victor said, gesturing to the board. "The first move is yours, a tribute to your initiative." I looked at Leo, who was standing just behind my shoulder. He was so tense he was practically vibrating. "E4?" he whispered, his voice a strained hiss. "Move the pawn in front of your king forward 2 squares. It is the most common and powerful opening." I dutifully slid the little pawn forward 2 squares. My heart was pounding for no good reason. It was just a game, a stupid, glorified game. But the intensity in the room was palpable. Abernathy was filming on his phone. Brenda was live texting the entire ER. Victor smiled and responded instantly, moving a pawn of his own. "A solid opening. The king's pawn game. You declare your intention to control the center of the board." "Leo, what now?" I whispered. "Knight to F3, he hissed back. "The little horsey, to the square in front of the bishop." I moved the knight. Victor mirrored the move on his side of the board. The game continued like this for a few minutes. Leo would whisper a string of what sounded like gibberish: Sicilian defense, Najdorf variation, Giuoco piano, and I would translate it into moving a specific piece to a specific square. My internal monologue was on fire. Okay, this is like titrating a dopamine drip. You make a small adjustment, you wait for a response, you adjust again. Except the patient is a handsome Russian Viking, and if you mess up he doesn't code, he just takes your little pointy hat guy. Victor was playing with a theatrical flair, moving his pieces with a flick of his wrist, occasionally steepling his fingers and staring at the board as if he could see the secrets of the universe in it. I was just trying not to knock anything over. After about 10 moves, the position on the board was complicated. There were pieces everywhere. Leo was whispering frantic instructions, but I was losing the thread. I was bored, and I was confused. My brain, accustomed to the clear, if-then logic of medical emergencies, was short-circuiting. And then I had an idea. It was a terrible, stupid idea. But it was my idea. It was my turn. Leo was whispering something about protecting my queen, about developing my rook, about strategic retreats. But I wasn't listening. I was looking at a pawn. A lonely little pawn on the A-file, all the way on the edge of the board. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't threatening anything. It wasn't defending anything. It was just there. To hell with it. Ignoring Leo's panicked hiss, I reached out and moved the useless little pawn forward 1 single solitary square. A 2 to A3. The room fell silent. Abernathy stopped filming. Brenda stopped chewing her popcorn. Leo made a small strangled sound, like a dying animal. Dimitri, Victor's manager, actually face-palmed. Victor, who had been leaning back in his chair looking relaxed, slowly leaned forward. He stared at the board. He wasn't looking at the whole board, just at that one stupid pawn. A full minute passed. The silence was so thick I could feel it pressing on my ears. I was sure I had committed the chess equivalent of amputating the wrong leg. Then, Victor looked up at me. A slow, incredulous grin spread across his face. "Incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with a strange, genuine awe. He shook his head, looking back at the board. "Utterly insane. It accomplishes nothing. It weakens your own position. It violates 100 years of opening theory. There is no logic, no strategy. It is pure chaos." He looked back at me, his eyes alight with amusement and something else, respect. "It is beautiful." He then calmly moved his queen to F7. "Checkmate," he said, his voice soft. Leo groaned and slumped into a nearby chair. Abernathy looked confused. Brenda started clapping. Victor stood up and offered me his hand. I took it, and he shook it firmly. "You are an honorary Grandmaster of Strategic Insanity," he declared with a grin. He pulled a pen from his pocket, took a napkin from the sad cookie plate, and scribbled something on it. "My personal number," he said, handing it to me. "In case you ever wish to discuss the chaos theory of anything." The next day, it was as if nothing had happened. The news vans were gone. The banner in the lobby was gone. Viktor Volkov had flown away on his private jet. The brief, surreal fever dream was over. I was back in the ER. It was 9 p.m., and I was once again cleaning up an unidentifiable mess from the floor of Trauma Bay 2. A new Steve. The monitors were beeping their relentless rhythm. The air smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. It was home. Mr. Henderson waved as I walked past his room. "Agent Nightingale? Did you win the Cold War?" "It's a stalemate for now, Mr. Henderson," I called back. "But we're holding the line." I reached the nurse's station, where Brenda was charting. She didn't look up. "So," she said, "was the Hot Chess Viking single?" It felt like the whole ridiculous affair had happened to someone else, in another life. The fame, the mob, the Grandmaster. It was all gone, evaporated into the relentless, grinding reality of my actual life. But as I sat down to tackle the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated in my absence, I felt my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the napkin I'd tucked into my phone case. A series of numbers and a name. Victor. I looked around the ER. At the controlled chaos, the ringing phones, the beeping machines, the tired faces of my colleagues. My life was still a mess. It was still exhausting and stressful, and often disgusting. But it was my mess. A small smile touched my lips. It was definitely never boring. I pocketed the phone and got back to work. "All right, Mr. Henderson," I said, picking up a small paper cup with his evening pills. "Let's go neutralize some Russian spies. But first, it's time for your medication."